Hello, Space Junkies, and welcome to episode number 81 of What a Piece of Junk, the Star Wars podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. I am your agreeable host, Scott Botman, and with me, as always, is my original Wookiee co-pilot, our very own Dave Phil Cloney, Mr. Miracle, the man of 1,000 nicknames. It is Nathan Miracle. Nathan, how's it going?
It is a tiring day today. Today we are recording on daylight saving time, and that is really messing with my system. So as far as I can tell, it's either supposed to be 9 o'clock or 10 or 8 or something. I'm not quite sure.
I would much prefer us to stick to one set of time all year round, and I would prefer for that to be metric time. But this podcast isn't long enough for me to go into all those details. So anyone who's curious, just Google metric time and prepare to have your mind blown.
And don't ask Scott, because it will take you a metric year to understand it.
It will. But we are so glad to have you guys joining us for this episode. Derek is off on special assignment, but we couldn't let another week go by without jumping on some awesome Star Wars content. And in this case, we will be talking a lot about the one thing that is blowing people's minds in the Star Wars galaxy, and that is the trailer for Star Wars Kenobi. So, Nathan, I know you've watched it a few times by now. What was your favorite part of the trailer?
I think my favorite part of the trailer was seeing the Inquisitors. We knew that the Grand Inquisitor was coming back, but we didn't know that the fifth brother was coming back, or if we did, I had forgotten that. And then we also found out about the Inquisitor Reva, who is played by Moses, and I apologize, I've forgotten her last name.
I too have, but we know who you're talking about. Basically, the new Inquisitor that we saw in the trailer there, that wasn't wearing any of the armor or lightsaber arrangements that we're used to for Inquisitors from the various animated series. Yes, that was a very exciting part. Now, what is it about the Inquisitors that's got you so interested?
Well, I just find the Inquisitors fascinating. We've got the rule of two for the Sith. But the Sith always tried to kind of skirt that rule. Count Dooku had his own apprentice who wasn't technically a Sith Lord, but was still kind of a Sith apprentice. But then when Asajj got powerful enough, Sidious said, "Oh, no, I don't want you taking over, so you have to get rid of your apprentice." Because it's always too powerful.
It's always funny to me when fans complain about how, well, you can't have this army of dark Jedi because the Sith have the rule of two. And I'm like, well, first of all, the rule of two didn't exist throughout Star Wars the entire time. And second of all, they're Sith. Isn't their whole thing that they break rules? I mean, isn't that the whole raison d'etre for the whole Sith religion, if you will? Is that back in the day they got all upset about the rigidity and structure of the Jedi, and they're like, we're gonna do our own thing. My passion is going to set me free. I'll break my chains. And like, I don't really expect that crew to spend a lot of time following the rules.
Exactly. So the Inquisitors are cool, in my opinion. They make for good bad guys because they're not quite as intimidating as Darth Vader. But if you always fight Darth Vader, that lessens him. This is something that we learned from Star Trek with the Borg. The first time that the Enterprise faced the Borg, they were this implacable foe that you just could not overcome. It actually took the power of a godlike entity Q to even let the Enterprise escape. But then we kept seeing the Borg, and the good guys kept winning, and that kind of depowered the Borg.
Yeah.
If everybody fights Darth Vader every time and keep escaping, if the good guys keep winning, that kind of lessens him as a villain, which is one good thing about Rogue One. The heroes may have accomplished their goals, but they didn't exactly win.
He did, she did, they all did.
They all did. So I like having the Inquisitors because it gives the good guys somebody that they can fight, that they can beat, without lessening the power and the mystique of Darth Vader.
Dave Filoni made a good point about this when he was working on Star Wars Rebels, and I believe Dave was the one who said this. Somebody said this in an interview, is that they used Darth Vader, voiced by James Earl Jones, no less, in that very special, very first episode premiere for, I believe it was episode or season 2 of Rebels,
Mhm.
where they actually showed it on broadcast television, and they had Darth Vader show up and oppose Kanan and Ezra, and Kanan and Ezra basically got their butts kicked, but they were able to escape. And he said, we're not going to use Vader in every episode because you don't want every episode to end with Vader standing there shaking his fist at the sky as Kanan and those rascally rebels escape again. It gets very Scooby Dooish, I'll get you, little Jedi brat, and your friends, you know. And so you don't want Vader to be the guy doing that because it makes him almost comedic.
So, Scott, what was your favorite part of this trailer?
It may sound cliche at this point of the trailer analysis life cycle, but I loved seeing young Luke pretending to fly a star speeder or a sand speeder or maybe a starship or whatever, sitting on the edge of the hut there with his piece of metal that acting like it's his steering wheel, and he's got the little things on his face and all. It was really like a bentha. It was really cool to see Luke just being a kid, and it's a very nice callback to the idea of when we meet him in A New Hope, and he tells that line to Wedge in the briefing before the Death Star attack run. It's just like bullseyeing womp rats in my T-16 back home. To him, it's still almost a big game, even though he did just see Ben die, and he did have to deal with that. But excuse me, seeing him pretending with that steering wheel, it's so cool because he's that kid full of wonderment and dreams and whatnot. And I like the idea that Uncle Owen is going to be a big part of this show, because we saw him in several scenes in the trailer, and I think it's cool to think about how when we see him as the grumpy old man in A New Hope, maybe he knows a whole lot more than he's letting on. That seems to be a theme with the stuff that was happening on Tatooine when Luke was young, is that everybody knows what's up, but nobody wants to spill the beans, including R2-D2. And so...
But they're all saying the truth from a certain point of view.
Exactly. They all believe that what they're saying, or at least what they're doing, is what's best for him, and that is the truth. In some manner of speaking, Obi-Wan Kenobi is definitely a crazy old wizard.
Yep.
Even though we think that Uncle Owen might have meant that as a derogative, but maybe he meant it more of just as a descriptor.
Yeah, and also, Uncle Owen said that Obi-Wan died about the same time as your father, which is definitely from a certain point of view.
Yes.
Obi-Wan left his old life behind when he left Anakin behind on Mustafar. So from that point of view, Obi-Wan died on Mustafar as well.
Right.
And then, of course, he became Ben Kenobi with the incredibly creative name change there.
Yeah, nobody will ever figure that out. I saw this great joke on Facebook the other day. It had Din Djarin and Boba Fett standing there in the jungle when they were getting ready to raid that Imperial base with Mayfield and all those guys. And Din says, if Annie is short for Anakin and Obi is short for Obi-Wan, what is Luke short for? And Boba goes, a stormtrooper. Ha 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 ha.
Very funny. Very.
I made the funny. All right. All I can think about is Master Splinter when we deal with older Boba Fett being the mentor to Din.
Yeah.
Good times.
But, you mentioned Luke, pretending to be a pilot. I really felt like he was pretending to be a pod racer pilot in that scene.
He did have goggles on, right?
Yeah, he had the goggles on, and the motions that he was doing seemed a lot like what Anakin did as a kid. And I think that was meant to be a nice little callback to, he wants to be a pod racer pilot like his father was.
Oh, what if they do a storyline where Luke is trying to, like a B plot, where Luke is trying to illegally enter a pod race on Tatooine, and he's sneaking around so that Owen and Beru don't know, and Obi-Wan finds out, and instead of ratting him out, he helps him, clandestinely. that'd be a cool little nod. And seeing a young Luke do pod racing on Tatooine would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think that might be more likely than it seems from this trailer, because of something that we'll get into a little bit later in the podcast.
Hmm. One other thing that the scene with Luke reminded me of, which makes it part of my favorite part of the trailer, it made me think of Rey when she was sitting out in the desert, putting on that pilot's helmet, and almost imagining herself leaving Jakku and being a pilot in space when she was there in the Phantom Menace, or not the Phantom Menace, sorry, in the Force Awakens. The phonetics are there, and plus first part of the trilogy. Anyway, in the Force Awakens, when she's at her wrecked at home, where she's eating her little, 1/4 portion.
Yeah, it's like poetry. It rhymes.
Exactly.
Anna
Totally.
dreamed of being a pilot and going to the moons of Iago and doing all of these things. Luke is doing the same thing here, and Rey will do the same thing later.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, now time for a slightly less feel good moment, I guess. What was your least favorite part, Nathan?
All right. Everybody's talking about it, but it's my least favorite part too, and it is the appearance of the Grand Inquisitor. We have seen his race in live action before, and
Hmm.
it looks more like what we see in the cartoon than what we see in this trailer. So that did throw me off a bit. Not enough to where I'm going to be upset or I'm not going to enjoy Kenobi for it, but it didn't quite register to me that, oh, this is the Grand Inquisitor quite at first. I had to take a second look and go, oh, okay, I do know who this is supposed to be.
Right.
But it didn't look quite right. And
The,
I kind of understand why they did it. I'm sure it's the same reason that they shortened Ahsoka's tendrils.
Mhm.
The Grand Inquisitor is going to have to fight. We see
Yeah.
him pull his lightsaber out. We know he's going to be doing stuff. And it's probably very difficult to do all that in practical effects makeup. At least when you get your head shaped, however that shape is called.
Right. Yes.
Oval standing up.
Oblong, towering skull thing.
Yeah, but that was my least favorite part. And if that's my least favorite part, I think I'm going to really like this series. So,
Yes.
what
Yes.
about
I'm
you?
I'm struggling to come up with a least favorite part. I guess for me it might be seeing Obi-Wan riding that EOP type thing through the desert. I would like. I mean, I guess it's an EOP.
I think
I
so, yeah.
I was kind of hoping he would be writing something else. I liked the idea that maybe he would have a Vractel or Dewback type thing. But it's a very minor quibble that he's writing in EOP. I get that it's an Easter egg, it's a callback to the Phantom Menace, that kind of thing. I think maybe my other least favorite part was when we heard the Duel of the Fates music. Not that I don't like Duel of the Fates, but the implication is there that Maul will show up, which could happen. But I don't want a rematch with Maul and a rematch with Vader in the same series.
So I don't think that means that we're getting a rematch with Maul. I think what it means is that the Force is giving the light side a do-over in the Duel of the Fates. So in the
Mm,
original Duel of the Fates in the Phantom Menace, the duel is about Anakin's future, and the dark side wins that duel. The dark side holds sway over Anakin's life from that point out,
mhm.
because they win that duel. That's what that duel is about. I think in Kenobi we're going to see a new Duel of the Fates for Luke.
Ah,
And
okay.
somehow the dark side's going to try to, gain control of Luke. Somehow they're going to realize that there's some force sensitive person on Tatooine.
Mhm.
They're going to find something out about Luke. Not all the details, because that would be kind of weird if Vader knew the whole time that he had a son living on Tatooine.
Right.
But somehow it's going to come up that if the dark side accomplishes whatever they're trying to accomplish in the series, that will lead Luke down a darker path or give them sway over Luke. And Obi-Wan is fighting to protect Luke. And this time, the light side is going to win the Duel of the Fates.
Interesting. Um, it'll also be interesting for me to see if when Obi Wan is protecting Luke, if the two of them ever cross paths somehow, and then he either has to make Luke forget, or it's going to be one of those things like Vader's line in A New Hope, where he says, "You should not have come back, Obi-Wan." There's a big open interpretation there, as to meaning that they had seen each other between Episode 3 and Episode 4. Um, I guess it could be that Luke barely remembers him as a crazy old wizard, or whatever. When we get to A New Hope, it would be strange to see some sort of memory wipe thing going on. Although it's not like we haven't had memory wipes in Star Wars before. It's just most of the time it's been from droids.
Well, I
Um,
don't think that there's going to be any sort of memory wipe. This might be where Luke meets Obi-Wan, but I think if he does meet Obi-Wan, he's just going to go by Ben Kenobi.
yeah.
And that would explain why Luke later knows, oh, I wonder if he means old Ben Kenobi.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true. Yeah. And certainly he didn't. Luke didn't bat an eye when Uncle Owen described him as that crazy old wizard.
mhm.
So maybe he already knows that old Ben lives out there in the wastes and is a crazy old wizard. Because when I was a kid, he'd come by and do these wizardy things, and he wished my friend Bilbo a happy birthday. Wait, no, sorry, wrong crazy old wizard. So yeah, other than the whole, I'm worried about there being a duel of the fates, too many rematches. I think you're right. I hope you're right that the soundtrack there is a hint that we're gonna have another fight for the future of some incredibly powerful force sensitive Skywalker, as opposed to Darth Maul's actually gonna show up. I mean, canonically, he could, because he and Obi-Wan could have fought again before they have their final duel in Rebels. Um, but that would
I
be
got the impression in Rebels that Maul didn't know at first that Kenobi was alive.
right. I'm about to
Um,
say it seemed as though he had discovered Old Man Ben for the first time
yeah,
in Rebels.
yeah. Now, it could just be that it's the first time that he realized he was on Tatooine,
Right.
because obviously they're going off world at some points in
Yeah.
the series, so maybe they'll meet up somewhere else. But I really don't think Maul's going to show back up, or if he does, maybe he shows back up at the end of the last episode after the credits, and we get one of the
He
stingers.
becomes king of the Star Wars teasers at that point,
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
you have Maul showing up and always at the end of I'm coming to get you. He's the
Oh,
Phantom Menace.
how,
Uh.
how cool would it be if that's a stinger for Solo 2?
Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, I'm still holding out hope, but my hopes are waning day by day.
Yeah, yeah, but I would fall out of my chair if that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, me too, me too. All right. Well, speaking of who might show up at the end of this or that, let's go ahead and jump into the big question for the trailer. What predictions do you have for the Kenobi series?
All right, so my biggest one is that this trailer almost entirely comes from the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have seen practically nothing of what's going to happen. And part of the reason I say that is looking at IMDb, Owen Lars and Veru Lars are supposed to appear in all 6 episodes.
Wow.
And if the series goes away from Tatooine and Obi-Wan has this other adventure away from Tatooine that takes several episodes, why would we have Owen and Beru? Unless
Mm.
we're going back to check in on Luke, but it seems like Luke's just playing pilot at this point.
Right, right. He's
Not
just
the
out there
story.
pretending. Yeah.
So I think most of what we've seen, or if not all of what we've seen, has happened in the first episode. And in that episode, they track Obi-Wan down to Tatooine, and then the rest of the story takes place on Tatooine.
I agree with you on that particular prediction, and here's why. I think a lot of the Inquisitor stuff and the special effects that we saw in the trailer are all in the premiere, like you said, and that other episodes, much like Book of Boba Fett or even The Mandalorian, won't have nearly as much alien or weaponry stuff happening. Not nearly as much special effects budget, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I totally agree with that prediction. And so all of that really flashy stuff that we saw is from the first episode, or maybe a piece from the finale.
Yeah, and that allows you to have a story like Luke tries to become a pod racer pilot.
Yeah, totally. Oh man, now I really want this to happen. That'd be
I know,
cool.
right? So I further think that the speech about the Jedi Code is like an itch means that they're trying to draw out some Jedi on whatever planet that is, the space version of Hong Kong. Um,
Right? Yes. Yeah.
there is a scene with Inquisitor Riva on top of a building looking down, and there's a big neon sign behind her
Hmm.
that, when you translate it from Arabish, says ER. So I'm thinking this is an emergency room. They've somehow injured somebody, but they've done it in such a way that they know some Jedi is going to find out about it and is
Right.
going to try to rescue that person. And they're going to ambush that Jedi or former Padawan or whatever. And then they're going to find out from that person, hey, what happened to the Obi-Wan guy? He's still unaccounted for. Oh, I heard
Right.
he was on Tatooine. They'll torture it out of that
Yeah. Yeah.
particular person.
Interrogate that person. Yeah.
Enhanced interrogation methods. Yes.
Yes, that's it. Enhanced interrogation methods. Okay,
All
I
right.
like that prediction. I think that's very plausible.
All right. Well, what do you have? What do you think's going to happen?
So this may seem like a total gimme, but I'm predicting that we will have a Darth Vader versus Obi-Wan lightsaber duel. You can't have Kathleen Kennedy out there hyping up, the rematch of the century or what have you, and not actually have them fight each other with lightsabers. But I think a lot of people are saying somehow Vader's going to come to Tatooine, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that's actually what's going to happen. I think that Obi-Wan is going to pull a fast one, a switcheroo on the Inquisitors. And when they're hunting him, he's going to be like a few steps ahead and reverse engineer where they came from, which will lead him back to Mustafar. And we will have Vader versus Obi-Wan fight on Mustafar at or near Vader's castle. If we don't get that as the site of the duel, we may actually get a nascent Death Star under construction where Obi-Wan and Vader fight their second duel. Because when Vader says you should not have come back, a lot of people think he means that, don't return to the galactic stage. But perhaps Vader's being incredibly literal and meaning you shouldn't have come back to the Death Star. Remember what happened last time we were here? And, I almost beat you. And so we'll have a nearly defeated Obi-Wan escape. But I think that is less likely because when Obi-Wan, as an old man, sees the Death Star in Episode 4, he's all, that's no moon, it's a space station. And he's less, assured and more surprised. I don't know. What
Well,
do you think?
on the other hand, maybe he does something that he thinks is going to delay or even stop the construction of the Death Star.
Hmm.
And this is why he knows that that's no moon. Because everybody else there is like, oh, that's a moon, some small
Yeah,
moon over there. He's like, no, I know what that is. It's a space station because I've been on it before. And that
maybe
would
so.
also explain, he goes to release the tractor beam. He never really looks up. Okay, so where is the tractor beam?
That's a good point. Obi-Wan just sort of seems to know. And as a kid, and in all these years, I've thought, the Force was revealing it to him. You could also make the case that at some point between scenes, he looked at the plans in R2's databank. But I last time I was here, this is where the tractor beam was powered because I had to shut it down when I escaped last time. That
Bingo.
makes a whole lot of sense. Makes a whole lot of sense. That'd be cool. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and nail it down. They will have their duel. Vader versus Obi will happen at the under construction Death Star, and we'll have a almost an Easter egg, wink, wink, nudge, nudge moment for fans because the Death Star under construction will very much resemble the one under construction in Return of the Jedi. Because these things are kits, right? I think
Yeah,
Palpatine got to buy one get
absolutely.
one free, right? It's an IKEA space station, their
Now,
station.
if that does happen, we could also see Galen Urso or
Mm.
Director Krennic or
Ooh, a
Bodhi.
director cameo would be cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any of them would be around and kicking at that time. Tarkin probably wouldn't be on the Death Star, from what we know of Rogue One.
No.
But we could see some other big names. Even Admiral Mahdi could
Oh,
be there.
you know what would be an epic crossover is young Moff Gideon,
Oh, that would be
like
epic.
Lieutenant Gideon or something. You know, Captain Gideon, even Cadet Gideon. You know,
That would be
that would be
something.
that would be
Okay,
pretty
yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
And this would make for a great final episode.
Mhm.
Like going into the final episode, he's found the Death Star. Or maybe they don't even quite reveal that, but he's found Vader's location. He's like, there it is. And then we close out the next to last episode, and the final episode opens up with, oh, yes, the thing I was pointing to off screen, Death Star.
Yeah, we got Death Star, Death Star, Death Star, Death Star. Okay. Yes, good times. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there were any other predictions that I'd want to go on record for this early. Definitely know there's gonna be an Obi-Wan versus Vader lightsaber duel. That's got to happen. And then, gosh, I think the only other prediction that I want to really lock in is that at some point, for some reason, we will see Vader without the mask and be able to tell that it's Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, I agree with
I
that.
love your idea of how in that series, when Obi-Wan looks at Vader, he sees him as Anakin, but everyone else sees him as, the cyborg. I don't know that they're going to go for that. I would love it if that happened at least once, though. Maybe some sort of weird Force vision for Obi-Wan where that happens.
Yeah, that would be great. One other prediction, this is a very minor one, but at some point, power converters in Tashi Station in Anchorhead
Yes.
will be referenced. I don't know
young-
how.
Maybe little kid Cammy and Fixer? Nah, they already had their moment earlier this year, right?
They did, but Biggs should still be on planet at this point.
Yes, little kid Biggs would be fun. That would be fun.
Yeah.
That would be so wizard. All right. Okay, cool. Well,
I'm not predicting Wizard comes back, although it did in the Book of Boba Fett. So
it did.
maybe.
No less than the Mandalorian himself said it, so All right, well, if any of those predictions come true, you can be sure that we will talk about it here on What a Piece of Junk. And there's lots of other things that people talk about here on the Fandom Podcast Network. So we're going to take a quick break so that you can learn more about all the other shows that are here on the FPN.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Well, great. Thanks very much, Kevin. I hope you guys can all take a moment to check out all those other shows. And Nathan, even though we don't have a whole lot of Star Wars news other than the Obi-Wan trailer to discuss on this episode, I did want to take a few moments to talk about a special Star Wars Marvel comic that came out this week, one that is a topic that is near and dear to both our hearts. It is Han Solo and Chewbacca issue number 1. I always refer to Nathan as my original Wookiee co-pilot, and as much as I idolize Luke Skywalker, let's be honest, if I was in Star Wars, I'm a much more like a roguish Han Solo type. So, we're sort of the dynamic duo of Star Wars fandom in our neck of the woods, and absolutely basing ourselves off of the original smuggler and Wookiee co-pilot combo there. Now, Nathan, I know that you don't read a lot of the Marvel Star Wars comics. I used to be way more into them right after Disney purchased the franchise and Marvel made a big to-do about bringing the Star Wars titles back, quote-unquote, home, because Marvel was the first company to publish Star Wars comics. The first Marvel Star Wars comics actually came out before the movie itself was released back in 1977. And so it does have a storied tradition there. That's where we got some very famous deep-cut fandom favorite characters like the Hoojibs, almost Star Wars version of Tribbles, little rabbity alien things. And of course, speaking of rabbits, everyone's favorite big green rabbit himself, Jackson, of who I finally have the action figure. And I went crazy over that when they finally released it a few years ago. I was hopping mad that they hadn't made one. It seemed to take forever for the figure to actually get here once it was announced. Thanks, COVID. Anyway, so it's really cool to see that Marvel Comics is doing Star Wars again. But for a while here, it's just spiraled so out of control. And you had to buy like every issue of every title to keep up with what was going. They had their recent War of the Bounty Hunters crossover, which was a cool idea, but it's one of those things where I decided I'm just going to wait until all of those things are available as a collected trade paperback before I try to buy it instead of having to chase down every issue. But and I know you pretty much feel the same way. But the good news is Han Solo and Chewbacca number 1 is emphasizing the fact that you don't really have to have followed all of the other Star Wars comics for the current continuity for it to make sense. It's just a nice, fun little romp with the two of them. So I shared this article that is a review of it earlier. It got 4 stars out of 5 from our friends over at Impulse Gamer. And I don't know, Nathan, what do you think from the review here and the preview panels and cover?
Well, I'm very excited about this. Chewbacca has long been one of my favorite characters, if not my absolute favorite character in Star Wars, at least until we got some clones. Thank you, D. Bradley Baker.
Yay!
Knock Chewbacca out of the top spot, perhaps. Depends on the day.
Yeah.
Still love Chewbacca. And it was great to have Chewbacca in the sequel trilogy, but only in one of those movies was he with Han Solo.
Right.
And that's really who he's best with. It's great to see him alongside Rey. Yeah, wonderful, whatever. I'd rather see him alongside Han Solo. So I'm very excited about this particular comic series. This series is set before A New Hope, so they are working for Jabba the Hutt. It is set after the Solo movie. So they have moved on to Jabba. That really big gangster on Tatooine.
Yes. Much that Han was hinting about at the end of Solo.
So I don't think we're ever going to get Solo 2. I think this is possibly the story that we might have gotten if we had gotten Solo 2. So definitely for that.
The reviewer talks about how the basic premise here is that Han and Chewie open up the issue by rescuing a group of criminals from the roof of a casino, and the criminals have just pulled off a big heist, and Han has to do some fancy piloting and some crazy stuff to get them to safety, and he needs the money for ship repairs, so he agrees to do a job for big money with Greedo, who he does not trust, but has to work with Greedo because it's a condition of the job that Greedo comes along. Obviously, Greedo is a bon vivant for Jabba the Hutt, an integral part of his organization, as so much so that when Han fries poor Greedo in A New Hope, in the deleted scene from the special edition there, we know that Jabba's very upset with Han for killing off Greedo, because apparently that was a big one of his operatives. So I like the idea not only that we have Han and Chewie working for Jabba. This is obviously before Jabba gets angry at them, but we see Greedo is involved in this story. So a nice little nod to old school original trilogy continuity of Greedo is the gangster liaison there, and a hardened criminal, obviously. Also,
Yeah.
I like the idea that
One of those great Star Wars really on the nose names, Greedo, the greedy guy.
yeah,
It's not perhaps not quite as on the nose as the Attack of the Clones guy. What was his name? The guy who wants to sell you the death sticks.
something like Sleazebag Gabano or whatever.
Sleazen Bago was his name.
That's it. Yeah, Sleazebag. He's some kind of sleazeball.
Yeah. But
George Lucas is not subtle. That's the thing.
No.
George Lucas is not subtle. And never mind the fact that back in the Phantom Menace, the original Duel of the Fates, we had Jesus and Satan fighting over the kid. Thank you, Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. Lucas is not subtle, and he continued that with Greedo, or maybe even began it with Greedo. And so I also like that
I think he began it with Luke S.
Yes. I also like that in this comic, a key part of the story is that Han Solo is doing fancy piloting maneuvers to get the group of criminals off the roof of the casino. I like any story where Han's ability as a pilot is key because, people don't think about it these days because, the most recent outing for him, he did share some fancy flying as Solo, but we also saw him screw up a couple of times in that movie because he's still making his bones, as they say. But you think about old man Han Solo isn't necessarily seen as such a great pilot, but this is during the height of Han's piloting skills, and he and the Millennium Falcon are just one with each other, and he's out there doing things that other star pilots could never dream of pulling off. Except maybe Poe Dameron or Wedge.
Yeah. So I didn't know about this particular comic until you told me about it. But I think now I'm going to go out to our local comic shop. Heroes aren't hard to find. # not sponsored. And try to pick up a copy and maybe get a pull list going.
Yeah. I may actually try to do that tomorrow myself. Now that you mention it, I'm sure they have it on the shelf because it was released March the 9th. So that was at this point in time during the recording here, that was 4 days ago. So, so good on Marvel for making a nice, almost standalone classic Star Wars original trilogy era Han Solo and Chewbacca adventure. And no disrespect to Alden Ehrenreich. I love the Solo movie. I went to see it 3 times in the theaters, but it is nice to see that the illustration of Han in this preview panel that we have here is based on Harrison Ford, and the cover for this issue would make an amazing poster because it's a classic old school style, almost watercolor Drew Struzan inspired artwork of Han and Chewie standing in the foreground with the cockpit of the Falcon back behind them, and then down below they have their weapons drawn, and down below them we have Jabba the Hutt sitting on his throne and an inset of poor Greedo, looking like he just walked out of the Mos Eisley Cantina. So it is peak original trilogy Star Wars illustration. In fact, I may try to get a poster of that at some point to hang up in my upcoming game room because that is some classic Star Wars artwork right there.
Agreed.
Well, Derek is not with us tonight, but we are going to do his favorite part of the show anyway. It's time to talk about what Star Wars t-shirts we're wearing this week. So, Nathan, what you got on?
Well, in honor of the comic book that we were just talking about, I am wearing my Beware of Wookiee shirt. a street signs, that yellow hazard sign style, but it says Beware of Wookiee, and it has a Wookiee on it. It is clearly Chewbacca because it has the bandolier.
Yeah.
He's standing up almost as though it was a beware of Yeti sign.
Yes, he's got his best Sasquatch action going on there, and almost a silhouette there.
All right, Scott, what are you wearing today?
So I've got on my old school Star Wars arcade game homage T-shirt, and it's actually the one that was made for The Empire Strikes Back. It's got the classic 1980s grid of graphics behind it, and there's a big giant AT-AT stomping across the screen, and a Rebel snowspeeder is heroically swooshing around the side of it, probably deploying its harpoon and or tow cable. And then down at the bottom, at the top, it's got high score and player one and all that jazz, and then down at the bottom it's got the old classic block Star Wars, the Empire Strikes Back logo. I actually got this T-shirt in a little box that looks like an arcade machine from the original Empire Strikes Back arcade game. So like that's pretty awesome. So yeah, I love this T-shirt primarily because it's one of the few Star Wars shirts I can find these days that isn't printed on black. It's a heather gray shirt as the background to make more of the details from the old display stand out. So I really like it. Plus, I put quite a few quarters into this video game back in the 20th century. Anyway, if you folks out there would like to get your own cool What a Piece of Junk merchandise, including a T-shirt, please check out the Fandom Podcast Network store over at tpublic.com. Just go to tpublic.com and search up Fandom Podcast Network, and you can find coffee mugs, mouse pads, iPad cases, T-shirts, almost any type of cool merchandise you can think of for our show and any of the other shows that are here on the FPN. All right, well, speaking of the old interwebs, Nathan, remind folks where they can find us out there online.
Oh, you can find us in tons of places. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play. Pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find us. You can also find us on Facebook, What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. Or you can email us, whatapieceofjunkpod@gmail.com, or find us on Twitter at WhatWars. You can also find us on Instagram under Fandom Podcast Network, which does cover the entire Fandom Podcast Network. So it's not just us there. And, speaking of Apple, we really want to get some Apple reviews. And Scott, can you tell us why we want those Apple reviews?
Well, when you upset the Wookiee, he's likely to rip people's arms out of their sockets. We haven't seen Chewbacca do it much, but we sure have seen old Santo, Black Chrysanthemum himself, do it. So, don't upset the Wookiee, and please go leave us a 5-star podcast review on Apple Podcasts. Also, remember, anytime you leave a podcast review of any kind on Apple Podcast, it does help other fans to find our show. So we would greatly appreciate that, and we promise not to send Santo over there to rip your arms out of your socket. All right, well, I guess that about does it for us this week. Nathan, where can folks find you on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Gooey Chewy. That's GOOEYCHEWIE. Or you can find me on Facebook under my real name. That's Nathan Miracle. And Scott, where can people find you?
My social medias are on Twitter. I am at ScotticusMax. I am on Facebook under my real name, Scott Bautman. And I do write my own science fiction novels, so you can check out my author website at writegreatscott.com. But until next time, we want to remind you all to please always respect each other and always respect each other's fandoms. Well, I guess that means it's time for me to say, all right, Nathan, punch it.